And welcome to the LBC Book Club. Every Monday night at 9 o'clock, we invite a leading author into the studio to quiz him or her on his or her latest book. And tonight, I'm delighted to say, we are joined by Gyles Brandreth.
I'm delighted to be here, excited to be here. To join your book club, Ian Dale, is really to have arrived. I mean, frankly. Richard and Judy, where are they? Where are they now? Merely on a billboard somewhere. There's no show, there's no nothing. If you want an intelligent book club, you have to tune in to LBC 97.3 FM, where Ian Dale, every Monday night at 9 o'clock, the intelligent people gather round.
I did say to someone earlier, I could just say, Gyles, what would you like to tell us this evening? And I wouldn't have to take part in the programme at all.
You wouldn't. I don't know why I'm not still here. The truth of the matter is, when LBC began back in 1973, on the very first day, I was one of the LBC team. And Michelle, my wife, and I, on the very first Christmas that LBC had in 1973, we were the Christmas Day hosts. And what a memorable day it was. Our principal guest was Barbara Cartland. Can you believe it?
Bless her.
Bless her! But she was great fun. We went to record the interview with her, and because we pre-recorded her, and I turned up, and she looked completely ludicrous. She was in a sort of pink tulle thing. She looked like a fairy from the top of a Christmas tree. And I muttered under my breath to Michelle, she looks like a Christmas tree. And as she walked away, she trilled, "Yes, but don't we all love Christmas?" And we did, and we do. And it's great to be back, and I'm thrilled to be here in Leicester Square, where I spent much of my childhood. But that perhaps is another story.
Why would you spend your childhood in Leicester Square?
Because my father was the legal advisor to the Automobile Association. And one of the most wonderful buildings in Leicester Square, where LBC is now broadcast from, is a building still called Fainham House, that was for, 60 years or more, the headquarters of the Automobile Association. And my father had a wonderful, at the corner of the building, he had a wonderful office overlooking Leicester Square. And from the age of about 7 till I suppose really till I left home, I would come to have lunch with my dad or visit my dad. I'd come on the Underground from wherever we lived. Well, we lived in Baker Street, so I came on the Bakerloo line. So I trolled around this square, and I love it. I love the statues in the square. One of the best statues of Shakespeare in the world is to be found in Leicester Square. It is, frankly, it's the centre of the universe as far as I'm concerned. And now you're here, Monday nights. Yay. Cancel everything.
Well, Gyles is here to talk about his various enterprises, particularly his books. Something Sensational to Read in the Train, which is out in paperback now, published by John Murray, $10.99. Oscar Wilde and the Nest of Vipers, also published by John Murray, in hardback at $17.99. I have read the entire diaries. I haven't read the latest book. I have to tell you now, because I meant to read it over the past few days, but one or two things caught up with me. So you're going to have to tell everybody what the plot is, but in just a minute, because I want to pick your brains first. Mm-hmm. Because we've heard on the news tonight that a good friend of yours, David Davis, the former Shadow Home Secretary, is going to rebel against the Conservative government on Thursday on tuition fees. Now, you wrote about him quite extensively in your Breaking the Code book, The Diaries of Your Time in Parliament, and you called him DD of the SS.
I did. And before we gossip about David Davis, which we will do, and we'll have fun doing so, let me simply say this. I am an enthusiastic supporter of the coalition government. And as I travel around London and the United Kingdom, I find that most people I meet like the coalition government and wish it well. But there are some people who don't, and these people are chiefly those people who are either journalists who are looking for trouble, or members of the House of Commons who don't happen to be in the government. And the truth of the matter is, we live in a difficult time where there isn't enough money. We have to actually think through the whole question of how we fund university education in a realistic way in the future. And the government has come up with a solution that has the support of really, able and intelligent people such as Vince Cable, such as David Willett, such as Michael Gove, such as indeed David Cameron and Nick Clegg. These people have worked the thing out. It seems to me to make sense, but of course there will be those not part of this. People who are on the fringes of the Conservative Party, who don't think they're going to be in government, and I'm afraid David Davis is one of these, and people in the Liberal Democrat Party who, frankly, have their reservations about the whole concept of the coalition, and they're not going to be in favour of it. So we will see this is the first rallying cry of people disaffected by the coalition. My gut feeling is that, frankly, this is about not really the future of higher education. It's about people's feelings of being left out of the coalition fight.
And the truth is, I mean, you were a government whip in the 1990s. You know, you dealt with a lot of MPs who wanted to rebel. And if someone wants to rebel on one particular issue, you can respect them for that. But when they're doing what I think people think David Davis is doing, and rebelling on this, that and the other, they have very little impact then, do they?
Well, you and I, now we can gossip a little bit about David Davis, who is a brilliant and a very nice person, and to whom I owe a great deal, because when I arrived in the House of Commons in 1992, I was taken under David Davis's wing. He was my whip. And he's a tough cookie, an ambitious cookie, nothing wrong with either of those things. He's also, on the whole, got a great sense of perspective. It was he who introduced me to the saying of the former Prime Minister Arthur Balfour, which perhaps sums up the attitude we should all have to politics. Arthur Balfour, Prime Minister, said, "Nothing matters very much, and most things don't matter at all." And that does actually keep it in perspective. David was a wonderful whip. He really had the feel for the House of Commons, and he understood how people, what the ambitions of people were, the way they worked. He was also a very good minister. But he enjoyed getting his own way, as do we all. And he has been thwarted in recent years. He resigned from the shadow cabinet in a sort of, a moment of, he hoped, glory, and it didn't really quite work. In fact, he resigned from being a Member of Parliament.
He did.
And caused a by-election, and then was re-elected, and it sort of seemed to be a storm in a teacup of his own making. He was the person making the tea stir in the teacup. And so he might have been Home Secretary, but he wasn't. And now here he is in Parliament, and of course he's got to make waves now and again, and he's climbed aboard this bandwagon. Well, this time next week we'll be talking about something else. The truth of the matter is, something has to be done about the funding of universities. And this is the solution that the coalition has come up with. It seems to make sense to me. They've actually sweetened the bitter pill with all sorts of little extras, and I can't argue against it. What is interesting is this, that I met last week with the dean of a university, a former polytechnic, who actually said this is going to knock some sense into the university system. Universities like Oxford, Cambridge, UCL, the big famous international brands, they will have no problems. They could charge £9,000 or indeed £19,000. They'd sell all their places. People need and want to go to the great universities. But he said universities like ours will find it more challenging. And we may actually have to really become something that delivers for the students. And instead of having these 3-year courses, we actually might have to think twice. We may actually have to offer students 2-year courses, 4 terms a year, not the long summer holiday. Focus it maybe on actually training for your profession. Deliver the goods. Charge people maybe, £5,000 for 2 years, but at the end, after that expenditure of £10,000, they're actually equipped with real qualifications, real skills for a working life. So it was interesting talking to him. He said, of course, none of us like this. Nobody wants to have to raise more money from the students. Nobody wants their budgets to be tightened. But given it's happening, maybe a dose of realism is going to be shot through the higher education university sector.
Well, that's a serious bit done for the evening, so we can now go on to the enjoyable bit. If you'd like to ask Gyles Brandreth a question...
Who do the people call?
They can do.
They've got your number, Ian Dale. What is your... People have long wanted to know what Ian Dale's number was. What is it?
My number, Gyles, is 0845 6060 973, and for the next 45 minutes, that's a number we are going to share. If you don't want to call, you can text your question into 84850. You can email Ian, IAIN, at lbc.co.uk, Or you can even tweet me at LBC973. Now, you used to tweet, but you've given it up.
Oh, let's tweet again like we did last summer. Yes, I mean, I'm actually, Cheryl Cole has got this marvellous new programme, Greek Philosophy in 18 tweets. It's fantastic. I've signed up to it. I'm learning a vast amount.
Have you seen this fake Cheryl Cole Twitter feed? It's Cheryl Curl. And it's all in Geordie. It is absolutely hilarious. But anyway, if you'd like to ask Gyles a question about his books, his theatrical career, his political career, his fascination with celebrity, his speech-making. He made the longest after-dinner speech in recorded history, I believe. He also has or had a teddy bear museum.
Well, some of the teddy bear, the museum in Stratford-upon-Avon is now closed, but the heart of the collection has moved to the Polka Children's Theatre in Wimbledon. So if you want to see the original Fozzie Bear, given to the museum by Jim Henson, if you want to see the original Sooty Bear, loaned to the museum by Mike Reed, if you want to see Paddington Bear, all your favourites, you go to Wimbledon, to the Polka Theatre.
I was more of a sweep man myself.
Oh, sweep! I mean, Sooty, of course, had a unique way with words, but sweep was, oh, gosh. I actually had the hots for Sue, too.
I bet you did.
Do you remember Sue?
I do remember Sue. That was one of my favourite programmes. You can also ask Gyles about his woolly jumpers, if you like, because he's still, I bet that's what people always say to you.
You dare. Do you know, fortunately, well, actually it has changed. I last wore one of my ludicrous bits of knitwear in 1990, which is...
For older readers... older listeners, Gyles used to appear on TV AM with Anne Diamond back in the mid-1980s, wearing the most ludicrous pullovers that you could ever hope to find.
I think you mean for younger listeners, because the older ones will actually know that. They may remember it.
That's true.
But the younger ones possibly don't.
I'm losing the thread here.
Yeah, and I have, with the woolly jumpers, lost the thread.
Anyway, for current listeners...
Do you know what I want? Is travel. That's the reason. One of the reasons I tune into LBC is actually, I don't want Ian Dell whittering on with his old mates hour after hour. I want what LBC delivers. The best traffic, the best travel, the best weather reports, the best, hardest, hottest news. Ian, are we ready for that?
I think we are. It's 9:16.
LBC 97.3, and here's the travel.
Diary, available now at lbc.co.uk.
You're listening to the LBC Book Hour with me, Ian Dale, and I'm joined by Gyles Brandreth. If you have a question for Gyles on any aspect of his multifarious career, books, theatre, politics, what more could you ask for? 0845 6060 973 is the number to call. Now, Gyles, we've had an email from Kate who says, can you ask Gyles, what does he think of the diarist Samuel Pepys? Could be a definitive film about his life, and who would play him?
Oh, what a brilliant question, actually. There has been a film of his life made in the 1930s, and there have been several stage shows about Samuel Pepys. The one I've seen was called And So to Bed, in which Bernard Miles, who became Sir Bernard Miles, later Lord Miles, who founded the Mermaid Theatre, Puddledock near Blackfriars, played the part of Samuel Pepys. And I think it would have it, because it's got everything. It's got, Samuel Pepys, it's got sex, because he was afraid. He was not a gentleman. So it's got him and his adventures, the long-suffering Mrs. Pepys, and it's got everything. It's got sex, royalty, gossip. It's got a great fire scene. I mean, actually, the whole town goes up in smoke, I think the Diaries of Samuel Pepys would make a great movie. Who would we cast as Samuel Pepys? Bill Nye. I'd have Bill Nye as Samuel Pepys, and Judi Dench as the long-suffering Mrs. Pepys, because she was a bit older than him.
Can there be a film without Judi Dench nowadays?
No, we don't want. And if she's not available, Helen Mirren will step into the breach. I think it's right. I wanted to be slightly amusing. I mean, curiously, I got into diaries because of Samuel Pepys, and if nobody's dipped into the Diaries of Samuel Pepys, there is a vast sort of 12-volume edition of the complete diaries, but there are quite a few good paperback versions of edited highlights, and it's only really in the last 60 years or so that the code was eventually cracked, and so the whole diaries are published unexpurgated, and they make fascinating reading. And he is the father of all diarists, and he perhaps is almost the only diarist who could write a diary in an unself-conscious way, because really ever since, well, certainly the 19th century, when diaries have started to be published, anybody keeping a diary can think, well, maybe one day, maybe my diary is going to be in print. And that does make you, it does affect the way you write a diary. I began writing mine because of Samuel Pepys when I was about 10 years of age. I was given a 1-volume version of the Diary of Samuel Pepys, certainly heavily expurgated. It was given to me by my Auntie Edith, who lived in Accrington. I come from Accrington in Lancashire, well, you can probably tell that from the accent. And I was fascinated by this, and it was Pepys's diary that persuaded me to start keeping a diary myself, which I've kept, really, since, well, I'm afraid for half a century I've been keeping a diary.
And do you do it every night?
Yeah, not every night. Sometimes I do it during the day. Sometimes if a couple of days go, I would catch up. When interesting or significant things happen, I tend to do it as I go. I mean, literally. When I was an MP, I was keeping it during the day, as were other people. I mean, there's the famous story of Barbara Castle, who was Labour cabinet minister in Harold Wilson's government. And this was a time when almost everybody in Harold Wilson's government was keeping a diary. Richard Crossman was keeping a diary. Tony Benn was keeping a diary. Mr. Crossland was Barbara Castle was keeping a diary. And Harold Wilson was, as it were, holding court at cabinet, and Barbara Castle was sitting there, and said, "Oh, Harold, do you mind not so fast having to keep writing it in my diary actually at the cabinet meeting?" You can do it in all sorts. I mean, sometimes I keep it on the word processor, sometimes I keep it in notebooks, in a variety of places, and I interleave it too with correspondence, with menus, with photographs, with cuttings from newspapers. So it's a kind of archive. And I had quite a depressing time last year because I was persuaded by a publisher who had read my political diaries, which you, Ian, were so generous about when they first appeared. There was a diary of the 1990s, really from the fall of Margaret Thatcher to the rise of Tony Blair. It was a sort of diary both of the John Major government and a diary of somebody becoming an MP and finding his feet as an MP and then becoming a government whip. It was all of that. Somebody who read that book and enjoyed it said, "You obviously do keep a diary. Why not give us something more?" And so I had to go back and actually relive my life from the age of 10 until, in fact, the turn of the century, sort of 40 years of diaries from 1960 to the year 2000. And I have to say I found it quite a depressing experience.
Why?
I mean, I hope it's an entertaining read, and it's been, wonderfully well reviewed, and people do seem to think it's funny and, occasionally perceptive, and obviously sometimes ridiculous, and all the rest of it. It's one person's life, and it's actually the life of a baby boomer. If you were somebody like me, born in the late 40s, brought up in the 50s and 60s, it's called Something Sensational to Read in the Train, after the line from Oscar Wilde's play The Importance of Being Earnest, where one of the characters says she always keeps a diary because one must have something sensational to read in the train.
I always want to say on the train.
I know, and so did I, and that's how I typed it when I sent in the manuscript, and then I realised, no, in Oscar Wilde's play, it's something sensational to read in the train. And the reason is this, I know I will draw breath in a moment.
This makes my job very easy.
Well, no, but you're right. I, as you will know, wrote a biography of the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh.
We'll come on to that in a bit.
But I will mention this story about the Duke of Edinburgh now, because I said to him, I wrote in my book, which he saw the draft of, that he had served on HMS Chequers or HMS Magpie during the Second World War, and he picked me up and said, "What do you mean I served on HMS Magpie? On? You don't serve on a ship, you serve in a ship. You don't live on your house, do you? You live in your house. You don't ride on a train, do you? You ride in a train. For God's sake, man." So the point is, so I never forget that, because I have to tell you, being torn off a strip by the Duke of Edinburgh is not something that you easily forget. So, correctly, if you think about it, you would be in a train. You're not on a train unless you have refused to pay the fare and are sitting on the roof.
I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed your diaries. There was only one thing that I thought, well, why did you do it all in one volume? Why not do it in several volumes? Because that was, to me, it was slightly unsatisfactory. You went almost from childhood to almost the present day.
Yeah.
And, I mean, Alan Clark did 3
I
volumes.
should have just been brave and said to the publisher, I want to do it. I should have done one, frankly, about the 60s, that actually gave people a flavour of A, my childhood, but B, their childhood. So I should have done the 50s and 60s first, then the 70s and 80s, then already I'd published the political ones, and then brought it right up to the present day. That's how it should have been done, but it wasn't to be. They said, cram it all into one volume. So at least the result of this is a very big book. And
it is a big book.
It's a big book, and so it does send you to sleep either by reading it or by it falling on your head and knocking you out.
Well, it took me 6 months to read it, because I read three pages a night, and then I do fall asleep. So you sent me to sleep most nights, Giles, for 6 months.
Oh gosh, what's happening in the weather?
We're not doing the weather yet. Something sensational to read in the train by Gyles Brandreth, published by John Murray at 10.99. If you'd like to speak to Giles, you can ask him a question on 0845 6060 973.
Ian Dale.
And you're listening to the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale, and Gyles Brandreth will be talking for the next half an hour until 10 o'clock, when Clive Bull will be taking over. Clive and Gyles have just been reminiscing about some old days at LBC. Now, Clive, what's on your programme later?
Yes, coming up at 10, well, your friend David Davis, we're going to have a little word about him and his decision to vote against the government. And I wonder what people make of that, whether you admire him for making a stand, and whether you think that will damage the coalition, or perhaps be a healthy thing. I think some might look at it that way. We're also going to look at knife crime and the apparent U-turn on that, with the question of whether carrying a knife should mean an automatic jail sentence. We'll have a look at that issue as well. And the great philosopher Eric Cantona and his plans for a more modern spirit of revolution. He's going to be urging people to make a stand tomorrow, and by a rather high-tech means, rather than protesting in the streets. So we're going to have a look at what he's suggesting we do, and whether such things would work. Do we need to modernise the way we protest, like bombarding people with Twitters or whatever?
I've never really been a great protester, so I'll take the fifth on that one.
Okay. That, and were you one of the huge number of people contributing to the record spending online today?
Yesterday I did.
Ah, well.
Bought lots of my Christmas presents
Nearly
online
there.
yesterday.
Yeah. So that's all coming up and more at 10.
We look forward to it, Clive.
Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. Now, if you'd like to talk to Gyles Brandreth, ask him a question on any aspect of his literary career, his theatrical career, his political career. He's had so many careers and enjoyed all of them, I think. 0845 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850. Anne has texted to say, Giles, will you be repeating your Oscar Wilde walk at any point? I went on the first one and it was fantastic.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Anne. Thank you for joining me. In fact, I've been on a sort of Oscar Wilde walk this evening, because to get here to LBC, now situated in Leicester Square in the heart of London, I walked along the Strand, past the Lyceum Theatre, where Sir Henry Irving was the great actor-manager of the Victorian era, in that period, and Bram Stoker was his manager. Bram Stoker, a great friend of Oscar Wilde. Ellen Terry, associated with that theatre as well. I walked past the Savoy Hotel, a favourite hotel of Oscar Wilde's. Indeed, evidence from some of the chambermaids at the Savoy Hotel really helped imprison Oscar Wilde in 1895. I walked past the Savoy Theatre, where the operetta Patience by Gilbert and Sullivan helped make Oscar Wilde hugely famous, because he was satirised. The aesthetic movement was satirised in that operetta Patience. So I've been on a little Oscar Wilde stroll this evening. But to explain to listeners who don't know what we're talking about, one of my careers, my latest career, has been to become the author of traditional English murder mysteries. I was brought up loving writers like Dorothy L. Sayers, Daphne du Maurier, Agatha Christie. The country house murder mystery is something I've always loved. And I wanted to write some Victorian murder mysteries. And I came across by chance, the fact that Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of the Sherlock Holmes stories, had met Oscar Wilde in 1889, and they'd become friends. And the idea of these two very different Victorians meeting and becoming friends seems so unlikely to me, because Oscar Wilde, of course, was this extraordinary dandy figure, this aesthete, this remarkably witty man. And Arthur Conan Doyle was a very different, rather more dour fellow with moustaches, a rather tougher, altogether more outdoorsy type. And yet these two men met and got on famously. They were introduced to one another by an American publisher who was in London. This was really the year after the Jack the Ripper murders were all over the papers, and this American publisher was wanting tales of mystery and murder, and invited Oscar Wilde and Arthur Conan Doyle to have dinner with him at the Langham Hotel here in London, in Portland Place. And as a result of the dinner, 3 books were born. One was The Sign of 4, the second of the Sherlock Holmes mysteries. If it hadn't been for that dinner, there might never have been a second Sherlock Holmes story. The other was The Picture of Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde's most famous novel, his only full novel, really. And 100 or so years later, a book by me called Oscar Wilde and the Candlelight Murders, based on the true-life friendship between Arthur Conan Doyle and Oscar Wilde. And my murder mysteries are set in Victorian London, and Oscar sets off really to solve crimes like a kind of Sherlock Holmes, with Conan Doyle as his friend and his sort of Dr. Watson. And I'm having huge fun with it, and the 4th in the series is just out, and it's called Oscar Wilde and the Nest of Vipers. And it concentrates partly on Oscar Wilde's friendship with Bram Stoker, who created Dracula, of course. It was an amazing era. All these men who knew one another. Oscar Wilde was a friend of the man who created, Dracula. He was also a friend of Robert Louis Stevenson, the man who created Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He was a friend of J.M. Barrie, who created Peter Pan. It was an amazing era. There must have been something extraordinary in the fog of London in that time. So that's what I'm doing now, writing these murder mysteries.
You could have just answered yes or no.
If I could remember what the question was, I'd give you one of those 2 answers.
Are you going to be doing more walks?
Oh, yes. Am I going on the Oscar Wilde walk again? I might well do. In fact, yes is the answer. And if you check out the Oscar Wilde Murder Mysteries website, there's a video of me doing a little Oscar Wilde walk on that. And it will give you details. It's, I think, called OscarWildeMurderMysteries.com. So you can find out more of it there. And if you're when you're next near the Langham Hotel, opposite the BBC, in Portland Place, you'll see there's a green plaque out there, which I had the honour of unveiling earlier this year, marking that dinner when Oscar Wilde sat down and broke bread with Arthur Conan. It's wonderful. I love unveiling plaques. It's I'm really a dab hand at unveiling plaques. In fact, I really think I should have been a dentist. I'm so good at unveiling plaques. But it was a very thrilling moment for me to unveil this plaque marking a real moment of literary history.
How many of the Oscar Wilde books have you written?
I've written 4 so far, and you can read them in any order. I mean, Oscar Wilde and the Candlelight Murders, which is now available in paperback, is, as it were, tells the story of the meeting of Conan Doyle and Oscar Wilde, and of the murder that Wilde had discovered earlier that day in a house in Little College Street, as you know, which is in Westminster. Oscar Wilde was actually questioned about Little College Street in his trial in 1895, and prosecuting counsel said to him, "Mr. Wilde, you frequented this house in Little College Street. Do you regard it as an entirely respectable address?" And Oscar Wilde replied, "Oh, you're right, sir. It is not a respectable address. It is very near the House of Commons." That was in 1895, so some things don't change.
No, indeed. Doris in Golders Green asks, will you be writing any more plays? You have the finest grasp of the English language, which people just don't have anymore. That was to you, not me.
Oh, she's a beautiful person. What is her name?
Doris.
Doris, I love your name, Doris, and thank you for being so generous. One of the pleasures for me of writing the Oscar Wilde murder mysteries is really writing the kind of, in the style that is both accessible, interesting to read, because obviously I want them to work as murder mysteries. You know, you've got to work out who done it. I'm setting out all the clues, and some of the stories, like Oscar Wilde and the Ring of Death, it's what is called a closed room mystery. There are a dozen people in a room, and you have to work out which of them done it. So for me, the thrill is both writing that and also celebrating the English language, because there's Oscar Wilde, this incredible wit with quite an ornate use of language, and there is Arthur Conan Doyle, who writes in a much more robust, clear, he writes an adventure story. But the English language in the late 19th century is very easy to understand, but it's also very well written. I mean, I love the English language. This year we're about to embark on the 400th anniversary of the King James Version of the Bible, and we're so lucky that, we have as our parent tongue this amazing English language. So for me, one of the pleasures is trying to write good English in the style of these great Victorian writers. And I am working on another play now. Thank you very much, Doris, for asking. It's a play about Lewis Carroll. We did a tryout at the Edinburgh Fringe this last summer with a wonderful actor called Michael Maloney in the lead part. Michael Maloney, a wonderful actor. You may have seen him in the film Truly, Madly, Deeply. He played Hamlet about 25 years ago. And he told me this wonderful story about when he was playing Hamlet. He couldn't work out the relationship between Hamlet and Ophelia. And he went to see one of the older actors in the company to talk about, because he said it's quite opaquely written. What is the relationship between Prince Hamlet and Ophelia? What's going on between them? I mean, for example, he asked this older actor, who was, I think, then playing Polonius, but had played Hamlet himself many years before. So Michael said to the older actor, what's going on between them? For example, does Hamlet sleep with Ophelia? And the old actor replied, well, I don't know about the West End, laddie, but we always did on tour. So, yes, I'm writing another play, and it's about Lewis Carroll, and Michael Maloney was in the tryout and was absolutely brilliant, and I hope it has a great future. So,
Steve, in Bristol.
Oh, people are getting in touch.
They are,
In
indeed.
Bristol, does LBC now in my day, we never reached...
No.
Oh, this is digital.
You've got digital, you've got internet. A lot of people listen on the internet. A lot of people, you can view LBC on Sky.
Oh.
Channel 0112.
Oh.
And you can actually have...
Maybe my friend Jason Manford is looking in now, hoping for some excitement. Hi there, Jason.
My mother watches the programme on Sky every night.
Is your mother watching
and you
us
can
now?
Also now...
Hi.
You can listen...
Proud mum. Hi.
Giles.
Hi. I'm Ian's friend.
Stop it. You can listen on your iPad or your iPhone now by downloading an LBC app. There are so many ways that you can now listen.
I'm only just catching up with iPads. For a long while I thought it was some sort of incontinence appliance, but it turns out to be a very useful piece of kit.
It absolutely is. And now let's get to the question from Bristol, because we're going to run out of time before the travel. Steve says, can you please ask Giles what were the best and worst things about his friendship with the great Kenneth Williams?
I've been thinking a lot about Kenneth because I'm reading this new biography of Kenneth Williams, who I knew, and I worked on his books with him. The best thing about knowing Kenneth was that he was incredibly funny. He was the funniest human being you could imagine. He was a bundle of just outrageous humour, and he knew that charm consisted of going as far as you can and then that little bit further. The worst thing about Kenneth is that when he'd gone as far as you can and that little bit further, he went further still and could actually ruin a good evening by going too far.
And that happened quite often, I think, didn't it?
It happened more and more, and I feel a bit guilty because in the end, I think, my wife and I, we loved him and we were honoured by his friendship because he was an older animal and he was very good to me. I mean, it was he who introduced me, for example, to Countdown. He introduced me, I think, to Just a Minute. Lots of wonderful things in my life that have happened as a result of being a friend of Kenneth's. But towards the end, he just became very difficult to be with, and he was very needy. And I don't know, we had our own lives, we had small children, we didn't see as much of him as we should have towards the end. And I remember almost the last postcard I got from him just a few days before he passed away, before he died, before maybe he took his own life, we don't know, was a picture of him looking up a periscope. And on the back he'd written, "Is there life out there anymore? Are you still there?"
Yeah.
And we weren't, and I felt bad about that. But anyway, I think back of him with enormous affection, gratitude. He was so funny. Wonderful to be with. Privileged to know him.
You're listening to the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale, and Gyles Brandreth. Gyles is here to talk about his book, I nearly said something sexational. I literally did a Jim Naughty there. Something sensational to read in the train, and Oscar Wilde and the Nest of Vipers, Ideal Christmas Presents. The time now is 9:46.
Time now for the LBC Travel.
You're listening to the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale, and Gyles Brandreth. If you'd like to ask Gyles a question, the number to call is 0845 6060 973, or you can text your question in to 84850. Now, let me tell you who's going to be on the book club next week and the week after. Next week, we've got Steve Richards, who's the chief political commentator for The Independent. He's written a book called Whatever It Takes. It's all about the Brown government. And then on the 20th of December, I think it's the 20th, isn't it, in 2 weeks' time? Anyway, the Monday before Christmas, we're going to be talking to Michael Winner, because we get all the celebs on this programme.
You do. I'm warming up.
Evidence tonight.
I'm warming up Michael Winner for you tomorrow. I host the Daily Mail Literary Lunches, and Michael Winner is one of our guests tomorrow, which will be good.
Well, we look forward to seeing him in a couple of weeks. Now, I also want to talk, to move away from books for a second, because you're on a massive theatre tour at the moment with your one-man show, which I had the pleasure of seeing at the Edinburgh Festival, and it's hilarious.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And we did wonderfully well in Edinburgh. I was on the Fringe in Edinburgh. Ian came along, and it wasn't just Ian. We had a good crowd. In fact, we sold out. 5-star reviews, fantastic. The producer phones me up and says, Gyles, would you like to take this to a few theatres? I say I'd be very happy to do, 4 to 5 dates, no problem at all. A week later, the same producer calls me back and says, Gyles, I've arranged the 45 dates you asked for. True story. I said 4 to 5. He said, no, you said 45. I've recorded the call. I said 4 to 5. He said 45. Listen to it yourself. Anyway, he booked me, because now with the computer, you just send out a message saying so-and-so is available. And I am now going all over the country. Last night I was in Tunbridge Wells.
And I'm ashamed to say I didn't come and see you.
Your hometown, you didn't come to see me. But happily,
it was bitter out.
But it was sweet in, because I can tell you they came and they enjoyed. I say they enjoyed. They were
and you conquered.
It was a very, very nice crowd. It was the show is always a happy event. Tomorrow night I'm in Norwich, but I'm doing lots of ones in and around London. I don't think Warrington is near London, is it? But in Canterbury I am next week. But in the new year, I know I'm coming to Richmond. I want all my chums to come to Richmond, because it's my home turf. I live in Barnes in southwest London, and Richmond is not far from me. So I'm coming there, I think on the 4th of February I will be in Richmond. So do come there. Edmonton. Your listeners, a lot of listeners come from Edmonton.
I'm sure they do.
Yeah, I'd like you to come. That's the 3rd of February.
What do you do in this one-man show? I mean, obviously I know, because I've seen it, but just tell people out there what you do.
Well, the reason it came about is that when I ceased to be a Member of Parliament, my wife said, well, do all the things you always wanted to do. And I wanted to go to Edinburgh to appear on the Fringe, and the first thing I chose to do was to be in a musical. And I did this show in Edinburgh of doing, 100 musicals in 100 minutes, and it worked well.
Zippity-doo-dah, if I remember.
You do. We did a shortened version eventually called Zip. And we played in Edinburgh, we played on tour, we did the West End, we won awards. Great fun. And interesting for me, because I ended up dressed up as, Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. So it was a slightly complicated experience, rocked my marriage, but never mind, you get through these things. So having done musicals, I thought, I'll do Shakespeare next. We did a musical version of Twelfth Night. And then I thought, actually, the big one is to do some stand-up comedy. And I'd had a go at doing stand-up 40 years ago. I was just down from Oxford University, and I thought I was God's gift to the world of entertainment. And I said to my agent, I already had an agent at the age of 22, I'd like to do comedy. And this guy, I think, thought he'd teach me a lesson. And he booked me, and this is absolutely true, as the support act at the Pied Piper Club, Manchester, where the act I was supporting was Bernard Manning. And aged 22, this boy, sounding as I do, went up in order to entertain it was a working men's club. You couldn't see the audience for the smoke, because in those days, clubs were full of smoke. It was men only. They sat there with their pint pots, gazing up at this lad, telling them amusing stories about Noel Card and other people in whom they were not in the least bit interested. Bernard Manning, when he saw me arrive, this wet behind the ears lad, said, how long are you booked for? And I said, half an hour, sir. He said, oh, good luck, lad, good luck. Go out there, just look at them in the whites of the eyes, feel the fear, just don't let go, keep going. And I kept going, and I can't say there was any applause when I came on. There was a lot of cheering when I went off, principally because I had to introduce the stripper next. But the reason I think I survived, and this is absolutely true, is about 5 minutes into my act, I saw the people who were gazing towards the stage, not actually looking at me, but apparently looking over my shoulders. And I glanced behind me and saw that Bernard Manning had positioned immediately behind me on the stage 2 topless go-go dancers. And these girls gyrated gently in time to my jokes. So I'd been through it bitterly 40 years ago, and I thought I'm going to give it another go. So, but if you come to see me in Edmonton or Richmond or whatever it is, rest assured, no topless go-go dancers, no stripper, in fact, no Bernard Manning material, meeting one-to-one. So it's a show about great actors, show business people, TV personalities, everybody, in fact, who I've met from the Queen through to Michael Jackson. So it's a story. I hope it's funny stories. There's quite a bit about politics, and I'm sort of trying to lift the lid a little bit off politics.
Don't put people off.
Oh no, does that put people off?
I think it does. Yeah.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Well, tell them the truth about politics. That's what I tell them.
It is very funny. You know, you and I had something in common because I made my comedy stand-up debut in Manchester too.
A
couple of years ago at the Tory Party conference. I did a turn for some prison reform trust event, and it was a comedy evening, and I had to follow Libby Purves and Jonathan Aitken doing stand-up comedy.
And this is for prisoners, so they couldn't get away.
There were ex-prisoners.
Oh, they were ex-prisoners. I'm sorry, I thought they were incarcerated. That is the way to be sure you get an audience.
It was the most terrifying thing I've ever done.
It is, isn't
but
it?
once you get that first laugh, then you're off and away.
The thing that I think that I really learnt from Bernard Manning was take your time. He said, take your time and shine. Just take your time. Because the truth is, and I say this to people who sometimes say to me, I'm going to give a speech at a wedding, or they're not used to it. The truth is, you've got to get up there and just take command of the situation, whatever you feel like. So, because the tendency is when you're nervous, particularly if they haven't settled down yet, is to gabble and to keep speaking too quickly. But in fact, what you should do is stand there and just feel the fear, sense the room, let the room settle, wait until the room has settled, and then just go for it, but don't rush it. Take your time.
Right, let's take a couple of texts. Barry from Bellingham says, was it true that on his deathbed, Oscar Wilde says, either that wallpaper goes, or I do?
He said it rather better than that, but that is the line. But of course, he was dying. We don't know. We don't. Indeed, either. Yes, exactly. Yes,
he did. Could have been worse for all you know. You weren't there.
I wasn't there. But 100 years after his death, literally, I was in the same room. He died on the 30th of November, 1900. And 100 years later, there was an amazing gathering in the room where he died. We all raised a glass to Oscar 100 years later. Yes, he is supposed to have said, either this wallpaper goes or I do.
And you did do that so much better than me. Andy says, have you recorded any audio books? And alas, I'm old enough to remember those wonderful jumpers. What have you done with them?
Even Oxfam won't take them now. It's heartbreaking and insulting. I've kept one for the Victoria and Albert Museum. Yes, I have done a number of audiobooks. The Oscar Wilde murder mysteries are available as audiobooks, not read by me, but I have done some audiobooks. I think the royal biographies I've done, and some children's books as well.
Right, 5 questions in a minute now. What book are you reading?
What's your latest book called, Ian? Because that's the one I wanted to read. I'm actually reading the new biography of Kenneth Williams.
Can you recommend it?
I can. I've only read the introduction, and I've checked the index, and I'm in it, so the book seems to be on the right lines.
Favourite book of all time?
The Old Wives' Tale by Arnold Bennett. It's just a wonderful, wonderful read. It's human, it's heartbreaking. Written in about 1907. Probably the best novel written in the 20th century, in my view, by an English writer.
The book you couldn't finish?
What was your last book called again? No. The book I couldn't finish, I haven't yet finished À la recherche du temps perdu, the Marcel Proust's great work. I've got all the volumes. I'm still on page 7 of volume 1.
And finally, the best book you've ever written?
I hope it's Oscar Wilde and the Nest of Vipers. I'm always very enthusiastic about the project I'm currently undertaking.
Which is published by John Murray at $17.99 in hardback. Something Sensational to Read in the Train is published by John Murray in paperback at $10.99. Gyles Brandreth, thank you very much. Clive Bull is coming up next. This is LBC 97.